The island of Madagascar, a colossal French possession governed by the collaborationist Vichy regime in 1942, unexpectedly became a pivotal nexus in the Allied global strategy. It was critical not for its resources or landmass, but for its role as a strategic gateway in the Allied shipping and anti-submarine defense network. Its imposing geographical position, particularly its control over the narrow 1,600-kilometer Mozambique Channel and the wide western expanse of the Indian Ocean, made it an indispensable artery for global commerce. By early 1942, the devastating successes of the Japanese invasion of Southeast Asia, threatening Allied bases in India, and the concurrent rampant German U-boat Second Happy Time in the Atlantic were severely strangling Allied supply routes. Ensuring the immediate security of the sea lanes running past Madagascar, which were vital to funneling supplies to the beleaguered Eighth Army in North Africa and providing essential material to the Soviet Union via the Persian Corridor, became an urgent, non-negotiable priority for the British High Command. The escalating and urgent need to secure Madagascar from potential Axis use culminated in the highly secret British Operation Ironclad, launched in the spring of 1942. The primary objective was purely preemptive and defensive, to decisively prevent the use of Madagascar's deep water, protected harbours, most critically the natural fortress of Diego Suarez, now Antsiranana, as advanced forward operating bases by the Axis powers. British naval intelligence had gathered alarming indications that the Japanese Navy, flushed with early, stunning Pacific victories and seeking to extend its sphere of influence, might attempt to establish submarine and naval refueling stations there. Such bases would instantly expand the operational radius of Japanese naval forces and, catastrophically, create a devastating global operational nexus with German U-boats, effectively allowing them to completely choke and close the only remaining reliable Allied global supply link via the Indian Ocean. The British invasion force, led by the experienced Major General Robert Sturgis, was substantial and meticulously assembled, comprising approximately 10,000 men. This force included elite elements of the British 5th Infantry Division, specialized amphibious assault forces, and the highly trained commandos of No. 5 Commando. The accompanying naval support was equally formidable and essential for the amphibious landing, centered on the aging but powerful battleship HMS Ramillies and the indispensable air cover platform, the aircraft carrier HMS Illustrious. The chosen initial target, Diego Suarez, was the island's absolute most strategically vital harbour due to its large, sheltered, and naturally defensible anchorage. The entire invasion was politically justified by the British War Cabinet under the necessity of preventing the global extension of the Axis tonnage war into the Indian Ocean. Theatre, a risk deemed existential to the Allied effort. The initial landings, launched in the early hours of May 5, 1942, near Diego Suarez, achieved almost complete tactical and psychological surprise. The entrenched Vichy French garrison, under the command of the fiercely loyal Gouverneur General Armand Léon Anet, initially resisted the attack with sharp determination. This resistance was fueled by lingering Vichy allegiance to Marshal Pétain and a deep-seated anti-British resentment stemming from the deadly 1940 British attack on the French fleet at Mers el-Kébir. The ensuing combat was fierce but concentrated. The British commandos and infantry, supported by synchronized air cover, provided by the Fleet Air Arm aircraft launched from HMS Illustrious, systematically overwhelmed the coastal defences. The capital's garrison was swiftly neutralised, leading to the formal surrender of the main port defences on May 7th, although this only secured the northern tip and represented only the first, limited phase of the overall operation. The immediate necessary success of the British invasion was quickly followed by a sharp, unexpected, and globally coordinated Axis counterstrike, which proved the British intelligence assessment entirely correct. This counterstrike was executed not by a conventional fleet, but by long-range, dedicated Axis submarines. On the night of May 30th, 1942, barely 3 weeks after the main fighting had ceased and under British control, a small Japanese naval strike force comprising the large submarine I-10 and 2 specialized 2-man midget submarines, Hay-14 and Hay-16, successfully attacked the newly secured Diego Suarez harbor. This brazen and successful attack demonstrated to the world precisely why the British invasion had been absolutely necessary, confirming the Axis intent to project naval power into and utilize the Indian Ocean region. The subsequent Japanese midget submarine attack proved to be an outstanding example of small-scale naval disruption and devastation. The midget submarine Hay-16, expertly navigated by Sub-Lieutenant Saburo Akieda, successfully slipped past the reinforced British harbour netting and anti-submarine defences. Once inside the main anchorage, it torpedoed both the powerful British battleship HMS Ramillies and the essential logistical tanker British Loyalty. While the Ramillies was severely damaged, settling on the harbour floor and requiring extensive salvage and repair, the tanker was completely destroyed, temporarily paralysing the port's refuelling capabilities. This audacious incident, occurring under the newly established British flag, tragically underscored the persistent and terrifying threat posed by long-range, highly capable Axis submarines in the vulnerable Indian Ocean. Following the initial, swift capture of the Diego Suarez fortress and harbour, the British High Command optimistically hoped that the local Vichy authorities would accept the inevitable and capitulate entirely. However, Governor Anet, strongly backed by ideological directives from Marshal Pétain's government in Vichy France, instead executed a well-planned retreat. Anet consolidated his loyalist forces and withdrew south and inland, strategically establishing a new centre of resistance. He maintained a determined, low-level guerrilla and resistance campaign against the invading forces. This forced the British to drastically expand the scope of their operation from a limited coastal harbour capture to a potentially lengthy, full-scale military occupation of the entire massive island, a huge and unintended commitment the British Chiefs of Staff had desperately hoped to avoid due to resource constraints. The stubborn and protracted Vichy resistance necessitated a massive and complex expansion of the original plan, resulting in Operation Streamline Jane and Operation Bulkhead in September 1942. These represented the large-scale, coordinated second phase of the invasion. These operations saw an influx of fresh British, South African, and East African troops land at the strategically key southern and western ports of Majunga and Tamatave. The operational objective was clear: swiftly drive south and inland, cut off Governor Anet S. Vichy escape routes, eliminate the organized resistance, and force a final, island-wide surrender, thus securing the entire island's interior and all remaining strategic naval and air assets before the monsoon season began. The entire strategic rationale driving Operation Ironclad revolved around the extreme vulnerability of the Mozambique Channel. This narrow, 1,600 kilometers straight, separating Madagascar from the African mainland, was recognized as the single, indispensable artery for British convoys. These convoys were essential for moving vital supplies to the Eastern Front, sustaining the British war effort in India, and most crucially, feeding the pivotal Eighth Army in North Africa. Axis domination of the channel, either through surface raiders or U-boats operating from secure bases, would have allowed them to operate unmolested in shallow, confined waters, instantly turning the high-volume supply flow into a catastrophic bottleneck of destruction, which could have potentially dooming the entire Allied campaign in the Western Desert. While the German High Command, OKM, had initially deferred responsibility for the vast Indian Ocean theater to their Japanese allies, the increasing strategic importance of the area, as evidenced by the massive supply flow, led to the strategic deployment of dedicated German U-boats. These boats, primarily from the long-range 9 and X flotillas, were dispatched on extended, grueling missions into the Cape route and the highly dangerous waters off Madagascar. These long-range U-boats, such as the notorious U-177, specifically targeted the heavily laden convoys supplying essential oil, vast troop reinforcements, and critical war materials traveling around the Cape of Good Hope, aggressively seeking to extend Hitler's successful tonnage war, the strategy of winning by attrition, to its absolute geographical limit. The German U-boat presence quickly intensified and peaked dramatically in the second half of 1942. The highly trafficked area southwest of Madagascar rapidly became a primary hunting and killing field. The single U-boat U-177, captained by the skilled Robert Guisey, achieved immediate and spectacular success shortly after arriving in the theatre, sinking the British merchant ship Chamonix and several others in quick succession near the island's southern tip. This concentrated sinking spree provided immediate, tragic confirmation of the British fears regarding the threat to the Cape route, and provided the definitive, retrospective justification for the massive military and political risks taken by the Chiefs of Staff with Operation Ironclad. The successful, sustained deployment of German U-boats to the remote waters off Madagascar was a significant logistical achievement for the Axis. It was initially facilitated by complex at-sea German refueling operations coordinated with large Japanese submarines. Later, this logistics was taken over by specialized large milch cow, Type 14th, U-boats that served as mobile oceanic supply ships. This essential logistical support allowed the German attack boats to successfully patrol the distant Indian Ocean for months at a time, without returning to European bases, dramatically extending their operational radius far beyond the expected limits, and successfully turning the Indian Ocean into a true, contested global battleground for Allied shipping. The confirmed Japanese and German submarine attacks triggered a major, immediate, and comprehensive shift in the Allied military response strategy in the area. The British rapidly and significantly reinforced their existing anti-submarine warfare (ASW) defences, deploying long-range Catalina flying boats and additional destroyer escorts specifically to patrol the long, vulnerable coastlines and the narrow Mozambique Channel. Crucially, the presence of land-based air cover, now operating consistently from airfields secured within Madagascar, significantly restricted the U-boat's ability to operate on the surface, where they recharge batteries, effectively forcing them to remain submerged and drastically reducing their patrol speed and hunting effectiveness. The determined final Vichy resistance, while militarily insignificant in the grand scheme of the war, had several compounding political and logistical consequences. It severely delayed the full transfer of key naval and air resources and forced considerable British forces to remain tied down on the island in a security and counter-insurgency role until November 1942. The campaign ultimately concluded when Governor Anet finally negotiated a formal, unconditional surrender near the inland town of Ihosi, officially ending Vichy French colonial rule and transferring the strategic control of the entire island, including all its crucial assets, to the fully reliable Allied command. The ultimate and desired political outcome of the protracted invasion was the establishment of a fully functioning pro-free French government on the island. This was a critical diplomatic and political victory for the Allies, conclusively resolving the Vichy dilemma in the region and cementing the crucial strategic port of Diego Suarez as a fully operational, reliable Allied naval base for the entire remainder of the war. This base was then dedicated primarily to the essential tasks of refueling, maintenance, and providing indispensable protection and escort for the steady flow of global convoys. The scale of the lost shipping war that Hitler attempted to wage off Madagascar was numerically significant, yet ultimately contained. In the immediate vicinity of the island, German and Japanese submarines successfully sank approximately 16 Allied merchant ships during the peak period of 1942. While this number was relatively small compared to the catastrophic losses suffered in the North Atlantic, it was strategically massive given the unescorted nature and vulnerability of the Indian Ocean routes. Had the Axis succeeded in establishing secure, permanent shore bases, this shipping toll would have increased catastrophically, potentially threatening the entire logistical structure of the war in the East. The sheer scale of the British deployment to Madagascar, although ultimately successful, necessarily drew highly vital military resources, including the essential aircraft carrier HMS Illustrious and several valuable destroyers, away from the immediate, intensifying fighting in the Mediterranean and the critical Atlantic ASW patrols. This strategic commitment was a calculated and acknowledged risk that illustrated the Chiefs of Staff's profound belief that securing the Indian Ocean supply arteries was, at that specific moment, a higher and more existential global priority than reinforcing certain European and Mediterranean theaters. The campaign became a peculiar and unique example of direct British-Japanese naval confrontation outside of the main Pacific theater. While the Japanese submarine force involved was numerically very small, their single, highly effective midget submarine attack caused the British High Command to significantly overcommit resources to what was nominally a secondary theater. This demonstrated the disproportionate power of a single, well-placed act of naval disruption to force a major reallocation of precious Allied military assets. Once secured, the active British occupation forces in Madagascar were successfully and rapidly rotated out. Control of the massive island was subsequently transferred to fresh, non-European forces, including experienced South African and East African troops, freeing up the skilled British and commando troops for the escalating and intensifying fighting in North Africa and the subsequent critical landings in Italy, the island then served effectively as a key, secure rear area base for the Allies, providing vast staging grounds, repair facilities, and logistical support far removed from the main operational fronts. The German U-boat attacks, though successfully disrupting shipping, continued only sporadically into early 1943. However, the rapidly improved Allied convoy security measures and, most critically, the fully operational air bases established on the island made sustained operations increasingly difficult, dangerous, and costly for the Axis U-boat arm. The peak period of Hitler's Indian Ocean shipping war passed swiftly and decisively, thanks in large part to the secured air and naval bases on Madagascar, which denied the U-boats the surface time and replenishment they desperately needed. The invasion was initially politically complex and awkward for the Allies, primarily because the US was not yet formally at war with Vichy France. President Franklin D. Roosevelt initially criticized the British for their unilateral action, viewing it as a potential unnecessary political distraction that could complicate relations with Vichy. However, the confirmed and widely publicized Japanese midget submarine attack on Diego Suarez provided clear, immediate, and undeniable ex post facto justification for the British preemptive strike, effectively silencing almost all American diplomatic and political objections. The campaign served as a crucial, complex proving ground for the deployment and coordination of large combined arms amphibious operations outside of North America and Britain. The immense logistical challenges, the difficulties in securing shore-to-ship coordination, and the complexities of command structure faced during Operation Ironclad provided invaluable, hard-won lessons that were rigorously documented and later fully integrated into the detailed planning for the much larger, far more complex Allied landings in North Africa, Operation Torch, later that same year, proving the strategic value of the operational experience gained. The political fate of Governor Annay after the final surrender was also highly significant and revealing of the Allied political stance. Unlike other minor Vichy colonial officials, Annay was considered a dedicated collaborator and was interned by the British in South Africa. He was later formally tried by the Free French government. His stubborn, prolonged, and dedicated resistance, which forced the British into a full-scale island invasion, cemented the island's importance as a strategic flashpoint and a symbol of Vichy resistance to Allied pressure, elevating its status in the context of the Free French movement. The ultimate and enduring strategic success of Operation Ironclad was not the simple conquest of the landmass itself, but the guaranteed, secure protection of the Allied global supply network. By decisively denying Axis forces a secure forward operating base on the island and cementing firm Allied control over the vital Mozambique Channel, the Allies effectively ensured the continuous, unimpeded flow of supplies. This persistent supply flow was absolutely essential for maintaining the massive Soviet war effort in the East, and crucially, for the success of General Montgomery's Eighth Army during the pivotal upcoming battles at El Alamein. In conclusion, the battle for Madagascar, though brief in its main combat phase, and often overlooked in the histories of the major European theatres, represents Hitler's lost shipping war, because the British preemptive seizure of the island ultimately and permanently prevented the catastrophic extension of the devastating tonnage war into the Indian Ocean. This decisive denial of a secure strategic Axis base preserved the most vital global supply artery to the Middle East, Asia, and the Eastern Front, fundamentally undermining the Axis strategy of global attrition and contributing fundamentally and irrevocably to the eventual comprehensive Allied victory.